Father, Son, and Violin. My earliest memories of my family continues. The last time we talked, I left my grandparents, auntie, and uncles who loved me the most in my young life, and was taken by my father on a train back to Changsha where my mother and brothers were. When I felt a little tired and sleepy, a noodle salesman passed by with a cart. My father hastily searched his pockets seeking every single coin. He put all the coins together in the middle of his left hand, counting them twice by the first finger of his right hand. In total he had 36 fun RMB, about 5 US cents. I could be wrong. I was after all no more than 6 years old. His expression suddenly changed to what seemed to be a little pleasantly excited. He called the noodle vendor with a rather positive tone. Father counted the coins again in front of the salesman and carefully handed them to him. As soon he took a bowl of noodles from the salesman, he slurped the soup, loudly, I suppose partly because he was afraid I would spill the soup if it were too full. He then passed the bowl to me very carefully. I nipped the noodles one by means of chopsticks, feeding them into my mouth. My father again turned his face toward the window. I looked at him and felt the blue veins on his neck appeared somewhat like blasted tree roots. I tried to observe his facial expression by looking at the window reflection. My father seemed to have noticed my intention. Purposely he blew some hot air on the window glass. Instantly my father's face became obscured. I squeezed the noodles and chewed them very slowly, deliberately making as much noise as I could, attempting to draw his attention. In fact, I was chewing my father's thoughts more than the noodles. Nevertheless, from the beginning to the end, he showed no response. Finally, I felt rather full. Though my stomach was filled, I quickly ate whatever else my chopsticks could catch in the bowl and then handed it over to my father. This time he responded right away. He took the bowl and poured what was left into his mouth at once. When we arrived at Changsha, the capital of Hunan province, and got home. When I say home, it was actually one of Father's office rooms. The first person and also the only person I met was a boy who looked only a little bigger than me. Father said something to the boy I could not understand, then he turned to me telling me that boy was my elder brother. Our father left us alone soon after this brief introduction and went to work. The next time I saw Father again was quite some months later. My brother Dan Sin took me to meet our mother. My elder brother Dan Sin is only a year and a half older than me. However, at that time his status seemed to be a generation higher, especially every time I saw the room key hanging around his neck. You see, being a 7-year-old boy, he was literally the key man of our home. What about other members of the family, my mother, and other brothers? Only a few minutes after I had been home, my elder brother Dan Sin told me that it was time to go see our mother and younger brother at a hospital. We went out. He had an aluminum lunchbox in his left hand and me in his right. Being a country boy's first time in a big city, I grasped his hand tightly enough to cause pain. Endlessly we walked and walked. I couldn't remember having ever walked so long a distance. Danson was constantly switching hands between the lunchbox and me. I wasn't aware it was I causing his hands pain, but instead thought the lunchbox was too heavy. I suggested that I could help him with the lunchbox from time to time. Honestly, I offered my help not because I felt sorry for him, but because I felt the lunchbox somehow symbolized a sort of privilege, and partly I thought taking the lunchbox might be kind of fun. After he refused me, I tightened my hand even harder, forcing him to change hands. I caught a chance and tried to seize the lunchbox by force. Undoubtedly he strove to avoid me. Back and forth a couple of times resulted in the lunchbox dropping out of his hand. Noodles were pouring out from the lunchbox onto the ground. With no time for him to show his anger to me, he quickly crouched down trying to get the noodles back into the lunchbox. At exactly that moment, a man dashed to the spot where the noodles fell, and soon more men were down too, on the ground, like dogs. Soon that portion of the earth was licked clean once, twice, and more times. The scene shocked my vexed brother, causing him burst out crying. It was his crying that shortened the distance between my brother and I, and made me realize that my brother was, like me, no more than a boy. He picked up the empty lunchbox and ran away in despair. I didn't believe he would really leave me alone in the middle of nowhere, at least I did not want to believe. Therefore, instead of following him, I stood still, until the view of his back disappeared in the distance, then I started to worry. I hastily chased him. When I saw him on a corner waiting for me, I relaxed, pretending not to see him, and walked my unnaturally slow steps like a Beijing opera actor, as if nothing had happened. When we finally arrived at the hospital, my brother's face was jammed again with new snivels and tears. My mother, a pretty woman with golden color framed glasses on her nose, looked quite elegant. When my brother narrated the lunchbox adventure, I hid myself behind him. My mother appeared not to pay much attention to my existence, but I knew she anxiously wanted to see what I looked like, putting all her attention toward a pile of bones that were wrapped by a sheet of human skin in her arms. That thing was my youngest brother. The only reason I could think why mother showed little affection to me was that I had destroyed her lunchbox. There might be some other reasons, for taking the bait of the party's call to have 4 children, for instance. Anyway, if there were other reasons, they must be reasons beyond the comprehension of a 6-year-old boy. I remember that I could understand my mother's language. She didn't ask me to call her Mama. Instead, she pushed me to call Danson Gugu, elder brother. Being shy perhaps, I refused. Danson took out a small toy frog from his pocket, saying he would only let me play with it if I call him Gugu. But my objective was to play with the lovely toy frog without calling him Gugu. Just like all other international affairs, when negotiations get nowhere, the war begins. That was the first of many fights between Danson and me. After we pushed each other back and forth a couple of times, I felt I was likely going to lose. I turned my eyes to mother, hoping to get some kind of support, but mother was busy with my little brother's diaper and acted as if we boys did not exist. Finally, I lost the battle, as I did all other battles later. I was shamed into anger. I called Chinese national names. Fuck your mother. I wondered why was it so funny that I said, "Fuck your mother," to my brother. Everyone, regardless if they were doctors, nurses or patients, all burst into laughter. That hit my mother at last. She immediately showed her attention to me by smacking my face, both sides. That action of hers did not correspond with her urbanely golden color framed glasses, indeed not at all. And yet to me, I had finally caught her attention, which was a kind of victory. My face revealed a little smile with the tears. But that facial expression lasted only a very short moment, because I instantly decided to utilize my usual game. I hit my bottom to the ground, and as loudly as I could shouted, "Ant! Ant!" until my bottom felt ice cold, my hundreds of miles away, and certainly did not show up. Going through that experience, I began to be aware that unlike my other family with my grandparents, in this family, I was by no means the center of attention. Fortunately, Danson was, after all, a good-hearted boy. He threw the toy frog in front of me, which gave me the perfect excuse to get my bottom away from that ice-cold ground. This was much more important than playing with the toy frog. To hit both sides of my face was the present my mother gave to me the first time we met after being apart for 4 years. But thinking twice, what else could she give me? A bar of milk chocolate. After I jeopardized her lunch and called out dirty names embarrassing her in front of so many. Introduction of my parents. Now, allow me to give a very brief introduction of my parents. My mother was born in 1922, the same year as the establishment of the Chinese Communist Party. She was from a poor family and lost both parents at a very young age. Nevertheless, she had a very strong will to be an educated woman and somehow managed to reach high school. That was rather rare at the time in China. Influenced by communist ideology during her high school years, she took part in some underground revolutionary activities. My father, on the other hand, had a much different story. His father, my grandpa, was a medical doctor. After receiving his education in Japan for 10 years, Grandpa came back to his hometown and established his own private hospital. Additionally, he inherited some land so that he was well off enough. Being the first son, my father was spoiled. He had a considerably good education beginning with private school all the way up to university, studying English literature. It was during the second year of his university life that his head was filled with Shakespeare. By chance, he met my mother at a school party. That meeting changed his life. I have always wondered if it was really my mother's revolutionary enthusiasm or her ardors as a pretty girl that aroused him. Whatever. Unbelievably, he gave up his university education, cut all ties with his family and followed his girlfriend, who later became my mother, to join the communist revolution. After the liberation 1949, my parents, as intelligentsia class, became a small portion of the new government. They both worked for the Hunan provincial government. Since the day they walked into their office they were classified as those who could be used but never trusted by the party. My father soon became a Communist Party member, while my mother never managed to get herself into the party, I think mainly due to her too straightforward personality and bad temper. In response to the party's call to have as many children as possible for the use of war, they got married and produced 4 sons, my elder brother Danson, me, Danjo later adapted to Daniel by my American English teacher, my younger brother Danpai and the youngest brother Danhen. Danhen was the one being treated in the hospital as I wrote above. I was sent to my father's hometown before I reached age 2, and my younger brother Danpai was sent to my mother's hometown not long after he was born. For some difficult-to-explain reasons, this book avoids talking about my younger brother Danpai. My younger brother Danhen's miracle. 1960 was the worst year of China's so-called 3 years of natural disaster. People gone from hunger or hunger-related reasons became a part of everyday life. We were the lucky ones as our parents worked for the government. Regularly we received carrots, white potatoes, and sweet potatoes, etc. as a result. Unlike many other families, the biggest problem for our family was not a daily struggle between life and death, but my youngest brother's health issues. He suffered from bad dysentery a few months after he was born. Several times, mother was informed by the hospital that the little boy had very small chance. All other kids in the same sick room suffering from the same killer didn't make it, but my mother refused to give up. Every day she held the pile of bones, persistently hoping for a miracle, and a miracle did happen. One day, my brother Danhen smiled. That earned the hospital a big celebration. Combined with a letter of congratulations, My mother received a very expensive bill of 300 renminbi, maybe $100 at that time. Seeing as the monthly salary in China was around 30 renminbi, paying back the 300 renminbi debt was a heavy burden pressed on our family for quite some years to come. My first days in Changsha were among the loneliest days in my life. As I mentioned before, after father took me back from his hometown, he disappeared from us for several months. As one of the could be used but never trusted party members, he was constantly sent to the countryside from one place to another to carry out the party's endless political campaigns. Neither was mother ever at home since she had to be in the hospital 24 hours, full-time, nursing my sick brother. The result was my 7-year-old brother Danson being totally in charge at home. But even Danson was unable to look after me as he had his own school to go to. In the very first days, Danson locked me up, alone, at home during his school hours. Perhaps I stole too much food to eat, he eventually had to lock me out. Once free, all day I spent my time using my fingers to dig in the ground where sweet potatoes used to grow, together with other hungry kids. The best sweet potato roots we could possibly gain were those as thick as half a small finger. One day I had to quit digging as I felt an extreme pain in my stomach. What I really needed was to lie down on a bed, yet I had to sit outside of our home for hours yet, waiting for Danson to open the door. When Danson came back from school and saw my mouth was full of mud, again, he changed his policy on me, this time taking me with him during his school hours. I played on the school sports ground while Danson had his classes. I must have made quite a hell of a noise as some troubled teachers suggested enrolling me as a pupil though I was underage. The awkward thing was when Danson took me to the enrollment office, neither of us knew how to write our father's name. After everything, Danson managed to get me into the school. Being 6½, I became an elementary pupil. Above are my earliest memories of my family. To end this opening chapter, I would like to mention my feelings towards Danson. Though his existence to me was almost the paterfamilias, and also in spite of the fact that we were getting closer and closer, I was still not totally willing to admit he was older than me, at least not on the surface. That is, until the later, cigarette ends incident happened, then things started to change.